Russian President Vladimir Putin is seriously preparing for autumn. The point is that the summer months were marked by quite serious fighting, mutual attacks and political tension for the Russian-Ukrainian war. The situation is changing on the Western Front. The prolongation of the war has greatly increased the number of people demanding its end. Some countries make specific calls for the end of the war, arguing that Ukraine could not achieve the desired results from counteroffensive operations. However, there are those who want the war to continue until the defeat of Russia. The prolongation of the war, the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive operations to produce the desired results and, most importantly, calls from Western countries to end the war, increase the likelihood that the parties will return to the negotiating table in the fall. In principle, the Russian side also states that it is ready for discussions. In general, official Moscow did not get what it wanted from the Ukrainian war. In other words, Russia needs peace as much as Ukraine. However, Russia does not give up its classic tactics and wants to get ahead of the possible negotiations in the autumn. First, the Russian leadership carefully monitors the growing calls for peace in the West and takes appropriate steps. Although the Kremlin says it wants peace, it also sends the message that it can continue the war. With this, he wants to further radicalize the West's calls for peace, and even pressure Ukraine in this direction. Second, Russia legalizes the use of nuclear weapons. In recent days, Russian officials have been speaking about the use of nuclear weapons again. In particular, it is noteworthy that in parallel with these statements, the drones, which are said to belong to Ukraine, have repeatedly struck Moscow. The point is that a nuclear country can use this weapon if its capital is threatened, the country is invaded, or a part of the territory is occupied. Against the backdrop of drone attacks on Moscow, Russia is giving the message that it can use tactical nuclear weapons. It is also a warning to the Kremlin, to the US and the West to bring Ukraine back to the negotiating table. If Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, this trend will spread and other countries may follow suit. This is a scenario that Washington does not want. Thirdly, the Kremlin's plan to open a Polish front is also noteworthy. Although the US is interested in the continuation of the Russian-Ukrainian war, it does not want the scale of the war to expand and spread to other regions and countries. Knowing this well, Russia creates the impression that it can open a new front in the example of Finland, Sweden, the Baltic countries and Poland. It is true that most of the mentioned countries are NATO countries, and Russia is not in a position to directly confront NATO. But the Kremlin can wage a proxy war with one of those countries. For example, a likely target is Poland. Official Moscow has announced that it has severed all ties with this military unit after the fake Wagner uprising or Wagner show that took place some time ago and will be transferred to African countries as well as Belarus. Wagner currently resides in Belarus and the number is increasing day by day. Worried about this, the Polish side is gathering military equipment on the border with Belarus. Official Warsaw is aware of what the Kremlin is doing. This is a scenario for the Kremlin to go to war with Poland over Wagner. If this happens, the next front after Ukraine will be opened in Poland. In other words, the risk of the war being avoided by the United States will be transferred to other countries. The Kremlin has not yet activated this plan, and is therefore keeping it in reserve to strengthen its hand ahead of talks expected in the fall. Fourth, the grain agreement and contacts with Ankara. Some time ago, Russia officially announced its withdrawal from the grain agreement. Despite Ankara's requests, the Kremlin has not yet said anything positive about returning to the agreement. It is expected that this issue will be discussed during the Erdogan-Putin meeting or telephone conversation in August. The Kremlin is well aware that withdrawing from the grain agreement means the start of another global grain crisis. Russia tested the results of the previous crisis. Therefore, withdrawing from the grain agreement will be one of the Kremlin's main pressure cards during the likely peace talks in the fall. As a result, whether or not negotiations between Russia and Ukraine take place in the fall, the Kremlin is seriously preparing for it. Negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will most likely take place in Turkey. Ankara, Istanbul or Antalya can be the cities where the meeting can be held.